And then, of course, redirection, teaching alternative behaviors that are incompatible, or alternative behaviors or teaching incompatible behaviors are always sometimes good. Redirecting the children to engage in other behaviors that can't coexist with the disruptive behaviors. Sometimes warnings help. A lot of the kids are pretty good if you give them timers and give them verbal warnings, especially if you follow through. Like we all see parents going 3, 2, 1, and the kids shape up. So if they get really consistencies on that, sometimes that can really help. Another area that we've worked on more recently, maybe in the last decade or so, is really figuring out what are the kids' strengths and using their restricted interests to develop clubs, play dates, other activities that are enjoyable to the children. So, a lot of people get a little bit nervous about using repetitive behaviors as a tool for intervention. So for example, if I have a nonverbal child that's turning on and off the lights, I'll cover up the light switch and I'll say on, because that's what they're interested in that right at that time. And I won't let them turn it on until they say on or approximation of that word. And there have been a couple studies by Margie Charlotte and other people that have shown that when you use their restricted interest as a kind of stimulus item, it does not increase during other times of the day. So you don't have to worry that since they're getting rewarded with it, that they're going to be doing it more. It seems like our research that we've done with Mary Baker and others has also shown that we measured it during other times. If we had what we've been doing is using this restricted interest that they have as the theme of a social activity. And we found that it doesn't increase during other times. And we can get it into appropriate context. So try to think of that, because when you think of the reinforcer hierarchy, that restricted and repetitive behavior is sometimes so high, even if sometimes it's like a preferred interest, sometimes it's just a repetitive behavior, but it's so high that even the DSM now has a level of how upset they get when you try to take them away from that activity. Well, think about that. That's because it's so reinforcing for them. And it's hard to find things that are higher on the reinforcer hierarchy. So when you think about it, if you're using that restricted interest as the theme of an activity, then they're going to love that activity. So preferred seating, just sometimes toward the front or the middle, sometimes toward the back, maybe sometimes with peer assistance. If you can get a competent peer, that helps, or a peer model. Another thing that's pretty easy to do is circulate. Rob Horner actually did some research showing that if someone on the playground, lunchtime is adults, if they're just walking around, there'll be a decrease in the disruptive behavior. So just having parent volunteers walk around the schools will decrease some of those disruptive behaviors. I did my master's thesis in speech therapy on physical exercise. I don't know how I got away with that one, but what we found is if the children had high levels of repetitive behaviors like self-stimulatory behaviors, hand flapping, rocking, that was interfering with the curriculum, if we did physical exercise, and it didn't work with the mild physical exercise, only the intense, more aerobic type of physical exercise, but if we jogged them for 10 to 15 minutes, it reduced their disruptive behavior as an antecedent. It wasn't used as a punishment. It was used as an antecedent intervention to reduce their disruptive behavior. The effects only lasted about 45 minutes to an hour, but it was effective in reducing their disruptive behavior and improving their on-task behavior. So that study we did with self-stimulatory behavior, but it's been replicated and presented. We haven't published it yet with disruptive behavior. So sometimes as an antecedent, you can just use this physical exercise. And a lot of the kids with autism, don't get involved in some of these sports activities, which is too bad because it can be really helpful. And then there's a couple interventions that are helpful in coordinating with the FBA. For example, self-management is something that we like to use a lot. Self-management, one of the things I've learned, we've done a lot of self-management over a lot of decades. And my very first grant that I had for self-management was with kids that had a sound they couldn't say, like they couldn't say their R's, like they'd say wabbit instead of rabbit, or maybe had a little frontal lisp, where they'd say some common things like that. And we put these little risk counters on them, and so that they could be kind of responsible for monitoring their own behavior outside of the clinic setting. And then we expanded it, and we got a 4-year grant from the Department of Education to work on it with kids with autism, because before that, people had said, oh, you can't, with severe disabilities, they can't self-control, they can't self-manage. So we showed that you could use the self-management, and really it's the idea of getting them to think about their own behavior. So instead of saying, good job, you'll go over to them and say, how did you do? Kind of not, how did you do? Because that's easy to do. But how did you do? And then they'll say, I did well. I completed my homework or whatever. And then you say, yay, I agree with you. So it's getting them that first step of really thinking about their own behavior. Scatterplots are just great. There's a lot on the internet you can download, because a lot of times kids have certain behavior problems. It's just like, what do they say? Married couples, almost all their arguments are in the evening when they're tired. And so kids might be the same way too. Maybe it's Monday. Maybe it's like I've had some kids that their best day is Monday. But having a scatterplot, there's a variety of different scatterplots, and looking at who they're with, what activity they're doing. Because a lot of times, I have parents that'll bring in their kids at certain times because they think they won't be disruptive, but I'll say, I need to see the disruptive behavior, so you want to kind of contrast it, figure out what is it about the environment when they're being successful, and what is it about the environment when they're not being successful that will make, what's the difference between those two? And then you can, maybe make one look more like the environment where they're being successful, then gradually intersperse those things where they're not being successful. And then one last study that we did focused on systematic desensitization. So we had a lot of kids that just had certain sounds or certain activities just really bothered them, and they'd get really disruptive. And one of the studies we published, we had some kids that the noises were really a problem. Like one child they couldn't take him to any other kid's house because the musical toys got him really disruptive. He'd cover his ears, and it looked like it looked like it was painful for him. He'd cover his ears and start screaming and crying. But we thought, well, maybe we could treat it behaviorally. So we thought maybe we could do a systematic desensitization and see if we could gradually fade that in. So what we did is we did a hierarchy, and we'd look at how upset they were. So like was it a little bit intolerable, or was it completely unbearable for the children? And then we developed these little tiny steps to move up on the hierarchy. And then also sometimes class-wide systems work with sticker charts or class-wide reward systems. That also can be helpful for some kids. But a couple of things just to remember in winding it down is they really need to be coordinated across all the kids' environments. We know there's behavioral contrast. If a child has different contingencies in one environment, they may even act up even more in another environment. So making sure everyone's on board. And sometimes it's not always the program you and I would like, because the parents sometimes, maybe it doesn't fit with their family values, or maybe they're not so comfortable about using the program. So figuring out a program that'll work for the family and be effective, and then taking data, because as Carol said, sometimes programs don't work. Things work with different kids. Different kids take longer. We had a discussion with a group of people once about how quickly disruptive behavior decreases, and we don't know exactly why it maintains for so long, but sometimes it may be the history, sometimes how effective it is, sometimes it may be getting intermittently and reinforced in one environment. So just really trying to get everybody on board, and also not warning people about behavior extinction bursts, because it sometimes will go up, and some kids go up for several days, and sometimes it's just, a few minutes. But sometimes for most kids, they will kind of go through their repertoire and try everything that's happened in the past. And then the other thing that we like to do is make sure that the parents are involved, assisting with both the goal development, and we do practice with feedback. So we actually have our parents work with the children, and we give them feedback. So we'll say, like, for example, I had a father in my office the other day, and we were trying to do some replacement behaviors for his son's screaming and aggression. And so at the end of the session, his dad said, "Can I get your business card?" And so I handed him the business card, and the kid wanted the business card. And so I said, "Oh, I can get you another one," but he did not want another one. He wanted the one his dad had. And so he started screaming and grabbing it, and the dad gave it to him. And I said, "Ooh, you know what? Why don't you just put that one in your wallet? Because, I think we don't want to give it to him when he's screaming, if you don't mind putting it in your wallet." And we have another one. So dad put it in his wallet, but he still kept screaming. So dad got really nervous and he got out 2 cards and gave them to him. So just really working with family. And then I explained to his dad that, that's how he's going to think he's going to need. And the kid could use words. So we tried it again and had the child ask appropriately for a card, and then his dad gave it to him. So just really having parents do it, because sometimes, like I said before, none of us parents like hearing our kids cry, and teachers, all of us that, we love kids. We want them to be happy. We don't want to hear them cry. So, and we know with the negative reinforcement, a lot of times it's easy just to stop it by giving them that reward. But since it's not good in the long run, we need to be all coordinated across all environments.